Scorigami is the act of making final scores in a sporting league that has never happened before. The term was first used in 2014 by the legendary Jon Bois. It is a portmanteau of score and origami. The idea is that every time one scores in sport, it's like folding a sheet of paper. There are some series of folds which have never happened before. Doing that achieves scoragami. Bois wrote about it in 2014, but it went mainstream after his great video from the YouTube channel then called SB Nation in 2016. If you're watching this video, you've likely seen that one. It works so well in American football because of the unique scoring structure of that sport. In 2025, Bois and colleague Alex Rubenstein did a 4-part series telling the history of the NFL through scorigami and where the future of it lies. I watched it and I saw Loopy Doopy's video on MLB scorigami. It got me thinking, if I could do a video on this subject, I thought there might just be one sport that rivals American football for its scoring weirdness, and if you clicked on this video, you'll know it's Australian football. I should note straight away that I'm not the first person to discuss AFL Scorigami publicly. Lincoln Tracy and Aaron Delaporte have written all about it, the latter for the Mongrel Punt, but a big footy user, TG Designs, who has researched this for many years, graciously has made it all public. Without this work, this project would have been much harder. When I'm showing any Excel spreadsheets in this video, it is his. This also opens up the way I'm doing this. I'm looking at the final score and not the goal and behind combination. Speaking of which, here is the Lego set for Australian football. On the box it says it's for those 5 and up, but we really know it should be 14 and up. Anyway, there are only 2 pieces, the 6-point goal and the 1 point behind. This is limiting, and there isn't another sport set up this way. Side note, the reason why this scoring goes back to a suggestion in a newspaper article, and the author admitted the numbers were based off, well, vibes. This was first introduced in 1897. It won't surprise you to learn that there were many scorigamis in the early days, because, well, those were the first matches being played. It might surprise you to learn that every score but one was novel in the first season of 1897. The first repeat score was 46-37, first achieved when Essendon beat Collingwood in round 9. It was repeated when Geelong beat Melbourne by the same score in the final series. Hey, remember the worst game of 2025? Yeah, that Richmond-Essendon game was 46-37. It wasn't even the Bombers' first game with this score. Some of these early day scores were really something, especially if they involved the whipping boy that was St Kilda, 59-2, 47-9, 15-10, 94-3, but this one is my favourite, 14-8, the lowest scoring game in league history, plus it's the last game of Essendon's 1897 premiership winning season. The tuned in among you will notice I didn't say grand final, because as you'll likely know, there was no grand final, but rather a round robin series to determine the premier. Essendon beat Geelong in the first of what has only been 2 finals playing Geelong. The Cats lost the other one, by the way. Essendon then beat Collingwood, so one last game was left, and a win guaranteed them the flag. They were set to play a Melbourne team whose defeat to Geelong the previous week knocked them out of contention. In the match, Melbourne hit the post 3 times, and a goal by Essendon player Norman Awar was disallowed after the bell. Edgar Croft kicked the first goal of the match after marking a skewed kick in the forward pocket. Sorry, I read that wrong. The first and only goal of the match, 1-8-14 to just 8 behinds. The lowest scoring match in v/AFL history was the one that secured the league's first premier. Jon Bois said no NFL game has a right to end at 73-0, not least the time it did occur, the 1940 NFL Championship game. In a similar but opposite way, there's no business for a game in the v/AFL ever finishing a mere 14-8, but this was the game, albeit not a grand final, that decided the premiership between 2 teams who finished 2nd and 4th after playing the 14-match home and away season. There were plenty of scores like that in the early days, 15-9 and 24-5, but one of my favourites is right here, 1899, Geelong 162 to St Kilda 1. Here's the best part. It was St Kilda who scored first. They led, and then Geelong scored 162 points in a row. The first time a team scored over 100 points was actually round 5, 1897. Melbourne did so with a 107-26 win over Carlton. It should be noted, because 1897 was the first year that the sport had this scoring system, so some of these are likely the first time the score was ever put up in the sport. Every year until 1907, except for 1904, more than 80% of games were scorigami. 1943 was the first season where most games were not novel scorelines. In his original video, Bois talks about great scorigami bumps, and I can see some here. 1925 is one that stands out. I imagine this is largely down to the VFL expanding from 9 to 12 teams, allowing more matches and a greater gap between the best and worst players. After this, scorigami looked like it was really cratering off through the 1950s and 60s. The other bump for mine, though, is around the start of the 1970s. This might be due to the fact that in 1972, the league went from an 18 to a 22-game fixture, now that Waverley Park was up and running. You can see this play out during the 1972 VFL Grand Final between Richmond and Carlton, the first of several games throughout this video I want to highlight to show how crazy some of these scores are. Less than 2 minutes into the game, Trevor Keogh opened the scoring for Carlton before goals to Barry Richardson and Neil Baum put Richmond in front. But then Carlton kicked the next 4 goals, 2 of them to John Nichols. At quarter time, Carlton led by 18 points, having kicked 8-4-52, a record first quarter score for a grand final. Richmond had kicked 5-4-34. 13 goals had been scored. As well as Carlton had played in the first quarter, they were even better in the second. Although Richmond's Kevin Morris opened the scoring within 30 seconds to cut the margin to 12 points. The Blues responded by kicking 4 goals in 4 minutes. By the 23-minute mark of the quarter, the Blues had reached 100 points. At the main break, Carlton led by 45 points, 18-6 to 10-9. Richmond had still managed to score 5 goals for the quarter, but Carlton were unstoppable. The 10 goals they kicked was a record for a grand final second quarter. When Sid Jackson kicked truly at the 30-minute mark of the third quarter, the Blues had broken the record for the high score in a grand final. There was still a quarter left. At the last change, Carlton had a 54-point lead. By the time the game was done, exactly 50 goals were scored. The combined score of 50-27, 327, was, at the time, the highest scoring game in VFL history, and at the time recording, still is for a grand final. In terms of V/AFL history, it's only been betted 7 times. Carlton's score of 28-9-177, which is quite remarkable accuracy, remains the highest in a grand finals history, and Richmond's 28-150 remains the highest losing score in a grand final. Carlton vice-captain Robert Walls was unanimously rated the best on ground, kicking 6 goals and directly assisting in 7 others. 59 grand finals have been Scorigami, including the 1909 VFL Grand Final, the very first footy game captured on film. If you saw my Geelong winning premiership series, you'll recognise the 1925 and 1937 grand finals. I've discussed those. Another one that stands out, the 1977 VFL Grand Final replay between Collingwood and North Melbourne. The previous week's 76-76 draw, which was the 4th in league history. North went in with an unchanged team for the replay, while Collingwood brought in Chris Perry for the injured Douglas Scott. Barry Cable kicked the first goal of the match for North. Wayne Richardson kicked Collingwood's first, which levelled the match. Arnold Briders ran into an open goal to give the Roos the lead before Malcolm Blight snapped through his first from a ball up. Minutes later, he followed up with a magnificent high mark and kicked the ball long to the goal square. Croswell kicked the ball off the ground to give North Melbourne a 21-point lead. The Magpies fought to stay in the contest and were finally rewarded at the 30-minute mark when Magro's free kick to the top of the goal square was marked strongly by Moore, who converted his set shot for his first goal. North led by 13 at quarter time. North Melbourne dominated play in the early minutes of the second term, winning the ball in the middle and marking strongly in attack, but were unable to capitalise on the scoreboard, kicking 6 behind in 6 minutes. Baker broke through the run of misses when he again marked strongly and extended the lead to 24. Collingwood replied through Barham, who hit the post from a free kick in the forward pocket and then scored its first goal of the quarter. The Kangaroos steadied again when Briders kicked his second goal after being awarded a free kick and a 15-metre penalty. Soon later, he hand-passed to Tanner, who ran in and kicked his first. When Casson made up for his earlier mistake by snapping North Melbourne's third goal in a row after Picken had lost the ball playing for a free kick, the lead had grown to 36 points. Collingwood fought back for the remainder of the quarter, kicking the next 4 goals to narrow the margin at half-time to 11 points. North got the first goal of the third with Baker's long-range set shot clearing the line, but the Magpies hit back with goals to Manasseh and Kink, cutting the margin to 5 points 6 minutes into the quarter. After trading goals, a crucial moment occurred at the 17-minute mark. Kink marked within scoring range, but chose to attempt a short pass, which was cut off by North. From that point on, the third quarter was North Melbourne's. Goals to Bryan, Croswell and Bridie's before Anderson revived hope for Collingwood supporters by converting his set shot at the 29-minute mark. North held a 30-point lead. 13 goals were kicked in the final quarter. The most famous belongs to Phil Manasseh. He picked the ball up and ran it down the broadcast wing. He took 4 bounces, faked a handball, and kicked a drop punt from 45. The difference was now 19 points with more than 10 minutes remaining. The Goal of the Year award is now known as the Phil Manasseh Medal. Ironically, because it was in a grand final, he wouldn't even been eligible. North Melbourne would hang on, though, for a 151 to 124 grand final replay Scorigami. But the Scorigami bump really became prominent During the 1980s, when scoring went into the ascendancy and new territories of scorelines were being found, the 1989 Round 6 match between Geelong and Hawthorn was at the heart of this. Geelong burst out of the blocks in the opening half. By half-time, the Cats had booted 17-6-108 to lead the Hawks by 49 points. But the Hawks bit back after, I imagine, a massive spray from Alan Jeans. The Hawks piled on 7 third-quarter goals to the Cats' 2. It was game on with the Cats leading by 19 at three-quarter time. But that third quarter was nothing before Hawthorn booted 10 goals in the last. That was more points than they'd scored in the first half. Dermot Broughton kicked 5, as did Gary Buchanara and Jason Dunstall, who had 4. Gavin Excel kicked 9. I bet you didn't even know who Gavin Excel is. Geelong did not lay up. They put together the highest losing score ever. 51 goals scored through the match, 171 to 163. Scorigami, perhaps the biggest outlier on this chart. This golden era came to an end in 1992, where 41.28 of games were Scorigami. It was fitting that golden era ended with a round 7 match between Geelong and Brisbane, because that broke records. Geelong ran home 16 goals in the first half, opening up an 89-point lead at the main break, but they were still less than halfway to Fitzroy's record league score of 238, achieved in round 17, 1979. Some teams might have taken their foot off the pedal, but not a Blight-coached Cats side. A barnstorming final term put the Cats within reach of the record score, moving to 232 points with a few minutes remaining. The ball fell to Andrew Buse, who slotted one last goal to tie the record before Billy Brownless wobbled through a behind after the siren to put the Cats at 239 points, a record that still stands. In 1993, it was down to 29.30% of games being Scorigami, and the following year was 29.31. But high-scoring classic Scorigami matches weren't done yet. The 1993 Round 2 match between Essendon and Carlton was one of those. This was the debut game for a certain Dustin Fletcher, who would retire only in 2015, having played 400 games. James Hird played in his 6th match and kicked 3 goals. Greg Williams racked up the most touches with 38 disposals. A fast-paced, high-scoring epic, Carlton led by single digits at every change, but only by 1 at the last change. Carlton finally appeared to have a grip on the game when they led by 17 points 22 minutes into the final term, but goals to Hird, Kieran Spawn, Peter Kransberg and Mark Harvey gave Essendon the lead by 7 points. At the 29-minute mark, in comes Stephen Kernahan, a Carlton legend, who kicked his 5th goal of the day. Scores were level, and in the last minute, courtesy of Reed Butlett, here is Rex Hunt, who was going absolutely crazy on his radio commentary, name-dropping an actor when the debutant Fletcher took a clearing kick.
Here comes Dustin Hoffman. Oh, Dustin Fletcher, I'm sorry. God, I've lost it. I've lost me bananas. Can you believe it? I was thinking that Mrs. Robinson in that movie. But here comes Sexton. Kicks it inside 50. Kernahan! Kernahan has marked it! Kernahan has marked it!
So Kernahan is marked strongly again in front of Anthony Danaher, 35 metres out. If Kernahan kicks a goal, this match ends 138-132, which was first achieved when Hawthorn beat Melbourne by that score in round 3, 1984. If Kernahan kicks a minor score, Carlton will win 133-132, which was first achieved when Collingwood beat Fitzroy by that score in the 1981 semi-final. In fact, Carlton beat St Kilda 133-132 in round 20, 1989. Kernahan has 19.2 metres worth of margin of error. Oh well, I guess this game just wasn't meant to be.
Siren is sounded, and any score will take this game into the 4 points area of Carlton. Kernahan, oh God, what's happening to me? Oh, no chance tonight, darling. It's out of bounds on the full! It's out of bounds on the full! Unbelievable! And it is a draw! It is a draw! As Kernahan has kicked it out of bounds. Ron Barassi's fallen over because Malcolm Blight did the same thing in a game against Hawthorn.
Ah, thanks for that, Kernahan. The one result we needed. That is the highest-scoring draw in the history of the V/AFL. The late 1980s and early 1990s were full of Scorigamis. Fewer better games of football, though, than the 1994 preliminary final between Geelong and North Melbourne. This was a match I was most pleased to learn was Scorigami. It was just an all-round Great game of football. Two of the best forwards of the era at opposite ends of the ground, Wayne Carey and Gary Ablett Sr. It was a tough, open game with a lopsided 33-12 free kick count in favour of the Cats. Carey got himself in the game right from the get-go, kicking 3 goals in the first quarter, which was the margin North held at quarter time. The Cats in the second kicked 7 goals in just 20 minutes. Paul Couch was dominant, and Ablett, Billy Brownless and David Mensch kicked 5 goals between them in the second. Geelong had wrenched control of the game, leading by 30 at the halfway mark. The third quarter was a goal-for-goal affair. North kicked 6 goals, one more than Geelong, but Carey kicked 4 of them. This was as good of a game as he'll ever play, but things would tighten up in the last. Adrian McAdam goaled to reduce the margin to 13 points. Anthony Stevens, who had 31 disposal on this day, grazed the post with the kick from 20 metres out. Brett Allison missed soon after. 15 goalless minutes went by. Allison finally ended that streak to reduce the margin to 5. From the next centre bounce, North got the clearance, and John Longmire marks in the goal square. He makes no mistake, and North are back in front by 1. Andrew Wills marks for Geelong outside 50, runs to 40, but is well offline. Scores a level with more than 3 minutes to go. The last 2 minutes give us some of the best action of the day. It's end-to-end stuff. Glenn Archer kicks a long bomb to the goal square, but John Barnes takes a great mark and then immediately dishes it off. Peter Riccardi gets the ball and takes 3 bounces on the far side wing, but his kick turns it over. Ken Hinckley wins the ball back for Geelong. The Cats go inside 50, and then Brownless just falls over, knocking it out of bounds. The boundary throw-in goes back to the line with Liam Pickering unable to keep it in. 25 seconds left. The thought of North's second extra time final this year is becoming a real possibility. Or do the Cats find one more score?
Hockey had a big lead. Mick Martin gets it. Battle to the chest of Colbert. There's 18 seconds left.
Colbert, what will he do? Started on the bench. We're down to 10 seconds. Colbert. And the mark is missed down there by Barnes. Right on the boundary line. Shooter. He will kick after the siren. Oh my goodness me.
There were 2 seconds on the clock when Ablett took the mark.
There is no justice in football. That was the look on the face of Michael Martin, the master all day, and this game will be remembered for this kick. Gary Ablett, 5 metres out. Any score will do. Geelong are in the grand final. Well, how about that?
Dennis, you call there's no justice in football. Mickey Martin has been a tremendous player all day. He's led his side so very, very well from the back. But Ablett was the man of the moment right at the head to clinch the game for Geelong. Incredible stuff.
Geelong win by 6 points, 16-13 to 14-19. Ablett winning the game after the final siren.
And it was their only goal in the last quarter.
Their only goal in the last quarter. What a way to win it. In 2000, Scorigami went over 30%, but we've never been back since. I think footy Scorigami really bumps when there's an increase in scoring. Among those games that season was the 2000 qualifying final. Matthew Lloyd kicked his 100th goal of the season in that game as the 4th place side got thumped. Scorigami is harder to come by now, but the 2002 semi-final between Adelaide and Melbourne was another barnstormer. I plan to do a whole The Case For video at some point on the right of teams to get home finals at their actual home grounds. Between 1991 and 2004, the MCC and AFL had a deal that was supposed to last 40 years, that one game each week of the finals had to be at the MCG. This led to 6 occasions, though the 1993 prelim is probably a fraction dubious due to the weird 16 final series of the time, where a non-Victorian team played a home final at the MCG. This was the 5th occasion. The home team Crows absolutely jumped all over Melbourne at the start of this game. This great Simon Goodwood goal, Adelaide's second, showed how Adelaide were up for this. When Scott Welsh goaled early into time on, it was 6-2 to fall behind. Melbourne would find their first when Scott Powell was driven into the ground in a tackle that 100% would be a multiple week suspension, despite what one of the commentators for this game, Stephen Quartermain, said at the time. Or now, to be honest. Travis Johnston puts it through, but 2 more Adelaide goals means they lead at quarter time 50 points to 10. David Neitz would help get Melbourne up and running in the second with the first couple of goals of the quarter after winning one-on-one contests. Melbourne are well and truly in this game when Peter Vardy kicks this fantastic goal up against the boundary line. Less than 2 minutes later, there's a turnover on centre wing. Adamize saw what Vardy just did and shows he can kick a goal like that. Only 51,533 people attend this match at the MCG, but they roared like 80,000 here. With 6.5 minutes to go in the quarter, Melbourne go inside 50 again. Needs can't take the mark, but Vardy grabs and goals. A Cameron Bruce goal reduced the margin to 8, but goals to McLeod and Binkel steady the ship. Adelaide lead by 17 at half-time. Despite Adelaide getting the first goal of the second half, Melbourne are on fire, and a running goal from John Stone cuts the margin to 5. 5 minutes later, it's John Stone again, and despite a 40-point Adelaide lead 32 minutes into the first quarter, Melbourne strike the front 11 minutes into the third. When Peter Walsh kicks truly just after Nigel Smart's booming kick for Adelaide, it was touched on the line. Melbourne have kicked 5 in a row and are flying. Neat, Johnston and lastly Walsh each goals, and the Demons have kicked 8 goals in a row. Adelaide get a much needed goal right on three-quarter time through Tyson Edwards. This game has had a ton of momentum swings and isn't done yet. These sort of weird quarters really help you get to scoragami. Matthew Bode is tripped and goals 6 minutes into the last. After Brett Burton misses, Adelaide complete the 7-point play after a poor kick from Clint Beazle. A Mark Stevens goal gets the Crows within 4. Then after McLeod receives a free kick for holding, he puts it through and Adelaide are back in front again. A Stevens goal is shortly after cancelled out by one from Neitz from 50. After a shooter behind, Woden's kick is cut off by Stenglein, who launches it to the goal square. On the other end of it is Brett Burton, who kicks what would be the sealer. Melbourne don't goal in the last 12.5 minutes after the Neitz goal you just saw. Ken McGregor's set shot is in the air when the final siren goes, and his behind secures a remarkable 130-118 scorigami. That was an awesome football game, but the 2008 round 5 game between the Bulldogs and Richmond was a memorable scorigami for the great image at the end. The 2 big takeaways from the first quarter were the Bulldogs spraying opportunities and 3 contentious 50-metre penalties. The Dogs kicked 4 goals 10 in the first quarter, though here is the 9th behind. The 2008 Richmond side deliberately conceding behinds after being called to play on when taking the kick-off? Surely not. Ben Hudson kicks a goal after the siren to give the Dogs an 8-point lead. They really should have been further in front. Brad Johnson kicks 2 goals in the second quarter to give his side a 20-point lead. But the Tigers fall back to secure 4 goals in 8 minutes in response to get in front. The Dogs will get the next 3 and the lead will extend to 15 points. At halftime, the difference is the same as at quarter time. An 8-point lead being the 8 more scoring shots the Bulldogs have had. In the third quarter, the teams exchange goals before Richmond kick 3 in a row. That makes it 98-86 at three-quarter time. When Nathan Brown kicks the 4th goal of the quarter, the 3rd for Richmond, the lead is 24. The game gets to a game-high lead of 25 soon after, but 3 quick goals in succession for the Bulldogs gets the margin to single digits. But Riewoldt and Simmons steady the ship for Richmond. Cross and Murphy got the margin down to 6 before in the last minute a mark was taken by Brian Lake, who goes down injured. Minson, despite being nowhere near the mark when it happened, took the kick and goaled. Richmond do get a centre square free kick and clearance, but time ran out.
And he's going to get a free kick. Patterson wants to go. Clock is down at 2 seconds. We've got a draw. Now that's interesting. I think he thought he was going to get the free kick. Nathan Brown was celebrating, but it's a draw. And how did that slip away from the Tigers?
That's interesting is one way to put it, Dennis. Nathan Brown famously celebrating a draw. That was the second highest scoring draw ever behind the Carlton Eston match from earlier. By the time we get to the 2010s, scorigami is now lagging below 20%. The 2011 round 19 match between Geelong and Melbourne, though, was part of one of the great scorigami streaks of modern day footy. I won't talk about this match a ton because I did that in part 4 of my Geelong Premiership series, so go there. I will say it fell a goal short of the record for both most goals and points scored from the 1992 game. The Cats for a brief period in 2011 were scorigami machines. They hit it 3 rounds in a row. All wins and they were the only Scorigamis across the league during those rounds. More scoring leading to Scorigami is true for all sports. Higher scores are going to be less frequent given we start at 0, but this is really true for Australian football, where we play with only 6s and 1s. This chart, though, really shows the wackiest part of footy Scorigami. It seems fairly reasonable at first glance, but we get some strangeness throughout. I thought there might be some more frequent scores at multiples of 6, given that is the most common and highest score, but there is no real correlation here at all. It is around the 60s, 70s and 80s on this graph where things really get weird. 70-62 has never happened. 73-63 and 73-64 has happened 11 times. This little detail here, though, is definitely the oddest one. It was actually hiding out in the thumbnail. Not sure if you noticed it. 80-79 is the most regular score at 16 occurrences. 80-80, right next door, for a league with no shortage of memorable draws, hasn't happened yet. You don't pick a Scorigami. Scorigami picks you. So as of the end of the 2025 AFL season, the league has seen 6,631 unique scores, the most recent of which was the Bulldogs' 126-32 round 23 victory over the Eagles. Something I noticed is while we get classic games still, they are less likely to be Scorigami. We've used so much real estate, it's harder to come by. What I love about Scorigami is its inherited silliness. Scorigami doesn't actually tell you anything about how well your team is playing or how good of a game it was to watch. It's not meaningful at all. It is, as Bois called it, the stat about nothing. So why do a whole long video on it? Why do you post about it, get heaps of likes? Because its silliness is the main thing it has going. It's just interesting how some scores you might have expected to have happened have not, and some you wouldn't have imagined to have happened. Well, they happened a while ago now. Scorigami is the one thing we can all root for. We can put away our petty arguments about my team being better than yours and just join in the celebration of seeing history. That's the other thing. It is at its core something that has never happened before. That is objectively great to say you win this regardless of what it is. That should be celebrated. I tagged 7AFL and Vox Footy to give us a Scorigami alert. Just like this example on an Amazon NFL broadcast, I hope one day this dream comes true. Scorigami is a stat about nothing and everything at the same time, but I think the real reason people care about it, other than its silliness, is Scorigami is often there for the wackiest and most brilliant games of any sport. Before I end, I must talk about one last Scorigami. It won't surprise you that it was, but it is one of the greatest games of footy ever played. The 1989 VFL Grand Final between Hawthorn and Geelong. My pick for the best grand final ever. Now, of course, no one in 1989 knew what Scorigami was because it was yet to be made up as a word for another quarter of a century, but if you had to guess a game would be Scorigami before it started, you might have fancied it before this one, given what happened earlier in the season. You know the story of the start, with Dermot Brereton being knocked out in the first quarter. Gary Ablett kicked the first goal of the game for the Cats, but not much really went right for them thereafter. Jason Dunstall marked in gold soon after to level the scores. Barely a minute after that, Brereton, only moments ago singly knocked out the game, took a strong mark and kicked truly. That lifted the Hawks, and they kicked 6 more goals to take a commanding 40-point lead at quarter time. The second and third quarter, Geelong slowly whittled down the margin with Ablett at the forefront of that. He kicked 2 memorable goals in as many minutes. The first going back with the flight to take a one-hander with opponent Scott Magnus all over him. The second was Ablett grabbing the ball from a boundary throw-in and kicking truly from a tight angle. When Buse kicked another, Geelong had got the margin back to 4 goals, but Dunstall kicked 2 more in time on, and the Hawks led by 37 at half-time, only 3 less than what it had been at quarter-time. The Cats again scored the first goal of the quarter through Ablett, this time marking a high kick from Gary Hocking. It was his 5th. The third quarter, like the 1994 prelims third, was goal for goal. The Cats only won the third by 1 point. Hawthorn led by 36 points, but had no fit players left to rotate, such as the testing of this game. Finally, the quarter was able to be dominated by the Cats. However, Dean Anderson seemed to put this one to bed with a late goal to put Hawthorn up by 17. It wasn't done though. Ablett equalled Gordon Coventry's 1928 effort with a 9th goal, the equal most in the grand final. A behind to Hawthorn from Peter Curran made it 12 before David Cameron marked and slotted through a goal with half a minute left. The Cats needed 1 more to force a replay, where the Hawks would be missing a lot of their stars. This is a game where everyone went down injured. However, time just ran out, and the Hawks locked the ball into the centre square. One of the greatest games ever played would be won by Hawthorn by just 6 points. Their first quarter display was enough to hang on. The late Dennis Cometti, may he rest in peace, gave us the perfect summation at the end of an era, the last game before the VFL became the AFL, and the end of maybe the greatest footy decade ever. It had to be Scorigami.
It looks like it's all over. The dream of back-to-back pennants is all but there as far as the Hawks are concerned. There's the siren. Hawthorn have won it by 6 points. A heart-stopper. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just seen a classic.